So we're going to be looking at the block scope of using let and const. You can declare variables. JavaScript previously we just had the one way to declare variables. Now with modern JavaScript you shouldn't be using var, but this is just an illustration of what var does, how it differs from let and const. So let and const are going to be block scoped when we output the code within the block. Though we're declaring var over here, when we declare it within the block scope, it just reassigns the value to the parent scope as well. Whereas let and const don't allow us to do it, and const of course doesn't allow us to reassign a new value to the variable. We've set up an HTML file. We're linking it to a JS file so that we can output the JavaScript within the browser. Let's go ahead and open up the JavaScript file, and we're going to create a couple variables. So the first variable is going to be using var in order to declare the variable, and the variable will just be having the user1. So this will provide a user name. The second variable will be using let to declare the variable name, and we'll declare it as user2. And then we'll also assign that same value to that first value. And then we'll also use const in order to declare a variable with the name of user3. And then within here, we're going to also provide that same value. So with let and const, they are going to be scoped based. So they're based within their own block of code, whereas var was the previous way of creating and declaring variables. So we only did have one way, and when let and const were introduced, they allowed us to have more flexibility when we are renaming values and variables. So if we do have a condition where we're going to check to see if a value is true, and then if this value is true, so this is going to create a block of code that we're going to be rescoping new variables and new values into. So let's select that. And we'll also use const as well within this block and create a new name that we're going to be assigning to these variables. So save that. And now let's output those values into the console. So we'll just use the console log. So we'll output all of the values into the console. So right now at this point, they all have the new name, and we'll also output them originally. So after this statement and this block of code runs, let's take a look and we'll see what we have for the values. So what happened is that with let and const, because they're going to be block scoped, the value of the name didn't actually change. But with var, even though it was within the block, it actually updated the variable name of user1. So it reassigned a new value to that variable. So that's the big difference between what we can do with let and const, because this allows us to have a variable that's not going to be updated accidentally within a different block. So in this case, if we were using user1, and if in a block of code we used user1 using var, then that's going to still update the variable. And if we try to use it after we ran that block of code, we're going to have a new value contained within it. So the block scoped variables and declaring block scope variables is much more advantageous as a web developer. And also the difference between let and const. So don't use var, use let and const. And the other difference between let and const, of course, is that if you try to reassign values to them, if you try to make an update to them, you're going to throw an error on const. You won't throw an error on let declared variables, but you will throw an error on const, because those are variables that are declared, and we don't want to reassign a new value to that keyword for the variable. So that's why we're throwing the error, and you can see the error being output into the console. So if you do have a variable that you want to change, then use let and change it within the block. If we're referencing the variable on the parent block, just the variable name, and we already saw that we can't reassign to const, so let's remove out that and only try to reassign to that current block of code. And then once again, if we reassign to the user2, then that's going to update within the block. So if we are not declaring the variable within the block, it's going to look to the parent scope. And in this case, it's going to look to the parent scope to see what the value of user2 is. So it's still going to be returning back a value for user2, and that's going to be referencing the value from the parent block. And I'll just remove out this new update of the variable. So now when we're using just the variable name without declaring it, that's going to be updating the variable within the parent block where we assigned it to user2. So here we come in, we assign user2 initially Laurence, we output it into the page. You see the output there for the user2, and then we update it. So we output it within this block where we haven't updated it yet. If we do place it before the statement, then we're going to see that update taking place within the block. And then also on the global block, on the parent block, we have all three updates within the variable names. Update the variable, and then we assign a new variable value to it. So if we do it within this order, we throw an error because the JavaScript code knows that within this block of code, we're declaring a variable called user2. So that's going to result in an error being thrown because we're not declaring the variable, we're not using the let. So we can't reassign to the parent scope if we're using the variable declaration within that same block. So if we comment that out, the error is going to go away, and what it's going to be doing is it's going to be looking to outside of the current block of code, going to the parent and reassigning that value to it. So go ahead and try it out and get more familiar with declaring variables in JavaScript.